My name is Father Michael Odhiambo, and I have served the Church in East Africa for 23 years now. I was born in Kenya, ordained in Uganda, and have carried the gospel through the villages where the dust settles so thick on your Bible that you must wipe it clean before reading each morning. I have witnessed many things in my years of ministry, brothers and sisters, things that have tested my faith and things that have strengthened it beyond measure. But I want to tell you today about something that happened in Sudan, something so extraordinary that even now, 3 years later, my hands tremble when I speak of it. Nothing, absolutely nothing in my decades of service could have prepared me for what I was about to witness in that forgotten corner of the world where heaven and earth would collide in a way that still leaves me breathless. It began, as these things often do, not with thunder or lightning, but with whispers. Soft whispers that grew louder, like a stream becoming a river. I was in Juba, conducting a small retreat for catechists, when a young girl no more than 7 years old approached me after evening prayers. Her name was Amara, and her eyes held that peculiar clarity that children sometimes possess when they see beyond our world. She tugged at my cassock with small, insistent fingers and said in broken English mixed with Arabic, Father, you must go north. The mother is calling you north. She says her son needs you." I smiled at her then, the way we adults smile at children when we think they are playing, and I patted her head gently. But Amara did not smile back. She gripped my hand with surprising strength and repeated, "The mother is calling you north, Father. You must go before the sand covers him." I dismissed it that evening, brothers and sisters. I confess this to you now with shame in my heart. I dismissed it as the imagination of a child who had heard too many Bible stories. But 2 days later, during morning mass, an elderly catechist named Yusuf stood up during the homily, something he had never done in 40 years of faithful service. His weathered face was pale and his voice shook as he spoke. "Forgive me, Father, for interrupting, but I must speak. Last night I dreamed of a priest buried in sand calling out for help. And above him I saw a woman dressed in blue, her hands covering the sand, keeping it from entering his mouth. She turned to me and said, 'Tell Father Michael to hurry north. My intercession can only hold for so long.'" The entire congregation fell silent. You could hear the wind moving through the eucalyptus trees outside. You could hear your own heartbeat in that silence. I tried to continue with the Mass, but my voice wavered. That same afternoon, another sign came. A refugee woman from Darfur, someone I had never met before, came to the parish office. She was thin, worn by years of displacement. Her headscarf faded from too many washings in river water. She sat across from me and spoke in a tired voice. "Father, I do not know why I am here. I do not even know your name. But for 3 nights I have seen you in my sleep. You are traveling north to a place of red soil and thorn trees. There is a man there, a holy man, and he is in the ground. The Blessed Mother stands guard over him, but she is waiting for you. She told me to find the priest with the silver cross, the one who wears it always." She pointed to the small silver crucifix I wore around my neck, a gift from my mother on my ordination day, which I never removed. My blood ran cold, hermanos. 3 people, 3 separate confirmations, and I had told none of them about the others. That night I could not sleep. I prayed the rosary until my fingers ached, walking back and forth in my small room while the ceiling fan clicked rhythmically above me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw sand, red sand, and I heard breathing, labored and desperate, coming from beneath the earth. At dawn, I went to speak with Bishop Emmanuel. I told him everything, the child, the catechist, the refugee woman. He listened in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, and when I finished, he said simply, "Then you must go, Michael. When the mother calls, we answer." He arranged for me to travel with a small delegation that was bringing medical supplies to a village near the Nuba Mountains in South Kordofan. The journey would take 3 days by truck, through regions where the peace was fragile and the roads were little more than suggestions drawn in dust. We left the next morning, 5 of us crowded into a Toyota pickup that had seen better decades. The driver was a Muslim man named Ibrahim, who knew the routes through the backcountry where government checkpoints were fewer. Beside me sat Sister Grace, a Ugandan nun who ran a clinic for malnourished children, and 2 young medical students from Nairobi who volunteered during their university break. The heat hit us the moment we left Juba, a wall of humidity that made breathing feel like drinking hot soup. But as we drove north, the humidity gave way to dry heat, the kind that cracks your lips within hours and makes your skin feel like paper. Sister Grace offered me water from a plastic jug, and as I drank, she said quietly, "Father, I also dreamed something last night. I did not want to say anything, but now I must. I saw you digging in sand with your bare hands, and your fingers were bleeding, but you would not stop. And there was a woman watching you, and she was weeping, but her tears were not of sadness. They were tears of joy, Father, tears of joy." I stared at her, the water forgotten in my hand. "Why didn't you tell me before we left?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Because I was afraid you would think I was trying to influence you. But now that we are on the road, you need to know. Whatever we are driving toward, it is real, and it is waiting for us." The medical students looked at us with confusion, but Ibrahim, who had been listening while he drove, glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said, I have lived in this land my entire life, Father. I have seen things that make men question what is possible. If the Virgin appears to Christians, then Allah permits it for His purposes. I will drive you wherever you need to go." His faith, expressed so simply, humbled me deeply. The first day of travel was uneventful, if you can call 10 hours of bone-jarring roads over washboard dirt uneventful. We passed through villages where children ran alongside our truck, waving and shouting greetings. We stopped once for fuel at a compound where the owner, an old man with tribal scars on his cheeks, offered us tea. As he poured the sweet, strong liquid into small glasses, he looked at me and said, "You are going to the place of the buried priest, yes?" My hand froze halfway to my mouth. "How do you know this?" I whispered. He shrugged, his weathered face impassive. "Word travels in the desert, Father. The wind carries stories. They say a Catholic priest has been put under the ground by angry men somewhere past the Nuba foothills. They say he's been there for days. They say he should be dead, but he is not. People are talking about it in the markets, in the mosques, in the churches. They say it is a miracle, or a curse, depending on who you ask." My heart began to race. This was no longer just visions and dreams. This was something that had actually happened, something real and terrible and urgent. "How many days has he been buried?" I asked. The old man counted on his fingers. "This is the 4th day, according to the traders who passed through yesterday. They say the extremists buried him because he refused to deny his faith. They gave him a choice: renounce Christ, or be put in the ground. He chose the ground." He said this with a mixture of respect and sorrow. Many men would have spoken the words just to save their skin, Father. But this one, he would not. And so they buried him up to his neck in the sand and left him to die. But he has not died. Not yet. The old man paused, then added quietly, "Some say they hear him singing hymns at night. Some say his voice carries on the wind, and it is not the voice of a dying man. It is the voice of someone who is not alone in that grave." We left immediately after finishing our tea, not even pausing to eat the bread the old man offered. The truck seemed to move slower now, every kilometer stretching out endlessly. Sister Grace began to pray the rosary aloud, and we all joined in. Even Ibrahim murmured prayers in Arabic under his breath as he drove. The landscape changed as we climbed into the foothills. The flat scrubland gave way to rocky outcrops and scattered acacia trees. The soil turned redder, the exact shade I had seen in my mind's eye. As the sun began to set on the second day, painting the sky in violent oranges and purples, one of the medical students, a young man named David, suddenly pointed ahead and shouted, "Look, do you see that?" We all strained to look where he was pointing. There, hovering in the distance above a cluster of trees, was a light, not the light of a campfire or a vehicle. This was different. It was soft, diffused, almost like moonlight. Except the moon had not yet risen. It seemed to pulse gently, like breathing. Ibrahim slowed the truck, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What is that?" he whispered. "I have driven these roads for 20 years, and I have never seen anything like that." We watched in silence as the light continued to glow in the gathering darkness. Then, as if on cue, a flock of birds, hundreds of them, rose from the trees and began to circle the light in perfect formation. They made no sound. Normally, birds at dusk are raucous, calling to each other, settling in for the night. But these birds were absolutely silent, circling in the dying light like a living halo. Sister Grace gasped and grabbed my arm. "Father," she breathed, "that is where we need to go." "That is where he is." I knew she was right. Every fiber of my being knew she was right. We drove toward the light, and as we got closer it seemed to fade, as if it had served its purpose in guiding us and was no longer needed. By the time we reached the grove of trees, full darkness had fallen, and we had to use our flashlights to see. We were in a small clearing, surrounded by thorn bushes and rocky ground. In the center of the clearing, the earth had been disturbed. There was a mound of red sand, and at the top of the mound, barely visible in our flashlight beams, was the top of a man's head. Just the crown of his head, his hair matted with dirt and sweat. Ibrahim stopped the truck, and we all climbed out in silence. The night air was cool now, a relief after the scorching day, but I barely noticed. All I could see was that patch of hair, that evidence of a human being buried alive in this forsaken place. As we approached slowly, almost fearfully, I heard it. A voice. Weak, but steady. It was singing. Not in English or Arabic, but in Latin. The Salve Regina. Hail, Holy Queen. The voice was cracked and dry, barely audible, but the melody was unmistakable. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, Vita, Dulcedo et spes nostra, salva. I fell to my knees in the sand, brothers and sisters. I fell to my knees and I wept. This man, whoever he was, had been buried for 4 days in the brutal sun and cold nights of the desert, and he was singing to the Blessed Mother. The medical students immediately ran forward with shovels we had brought for the supply delivery, and they began to dig frantically. Sister Grace knelt beside me, and together we prayed, our voices joining with his. Ad declamamus, exuls filii Hevae. To you do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. As the students dug, removing sand carefully from around the buried man's head, I could see more of his face. He was younger than I expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with African features and a face that, despite everything, held a strange peace. His eyes were closed, his lips cracked and bleeding, but he continued to sing, even as we uncovered him. When enough sand was removed that he could speak more freely, he opened his eyes and looked directly at me. His voice was a rasp, but his words were clear. I knew she would send someone. I knew she would not abandon me. Every night, when the cold came and I thought I would finally slip away, I felt her hands on my head, warm and gentle. She kept the scorpions away, Father. She kept the sand from my mouth when the wind blew. She gave me water that was not water, and I drank and was sustained. 4 days I have been here, and I am still alive because she willed it so. The medical students worked faster now, their young faces set with determination and shock. It took nearly 2 hours to excavate enough sand to free his arms, his torso, his legs. When he was finally pulled from the ground, he could not stand on his own. His legs had no strength after being compressed for so long. We laid him on a blanket, and Sister Grace immediately began to examine him for injuries, while the students brought water and nutrition packets. But here is what I need you to understand, hermanos. This man should have been dead. 4 days without water in the desert is a death sentence. 4 days buried in sand, exposed to sun that reaches 45 degrees Celsius during the day and drops near freezing at night is impossible to survive. The human body simply cannot endure it. Yet here he was, dehydrated certainly, weakened absolutely, but alive, conscious, singing hymns. As Sister Grace checked his vital signs, she kept shaking her head in disbelief. His pulse is weak, but steady, she murmured. His breathing is labored, but regular. Father, by every medical standard I know, he should be an organ failure. He should be delirious, unconscious, or dead. But he is none of these things. The young priest, for that is who he was, Father Samuel from a parish near Kadugli, smiled weakly at her words. Sister, he whispered, I am alive because I was not alone in that grave. Every night I saw her. She wore blue, the color of the sky at dawn. She spoke to me, not with words, but with presence. She sang with me. And when the men who buried me came back on the second day to see if I was dead yet, she stood between them and me. They could not come close. They tried, but they turned away, afraid. One of them said he saw a woman made of light, and they fled. We stayed in that clearing through the night, giving Father Samuel small sips of water and broth, warming him with blankets, praying over him continuously. And as the night deepened and the stars came out in their thousands across the unpolluted desert sky, I felt something I had never felt before in my life. It was as if the air itself was alive with presence, with watching, with love. The thorn bushes around us seemed to glow faintly in the starlight, and several times I thought I caught the scent of roses, which made no sense in this arid place where nothing bloomed. Sister Grace smelled it too. I saw her lift her head and breathe deeply, her eyes wide with wonder. Ibrahim, our Muslim driver, sat apart from us, facing east, and I saw him prostrate himself in prayer, his forehead touching the sand over and over again. Later, he would tell me that he felt the presence of the divine in that place, and it did not matter to him whether we called her Mary or something else. Holiness, he said, is holiness, and it cannot be denied. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Father Samuel's voice grew stronger. He asked to sit up, and with our help, he managed it. He looked at each of us in turn, his eyes now clear and focused, and he said, You must tell everyone what happened here. Not for my glory, but for hers. In a world that is tearing itself apart with hatred and division, people need to know that heaven still watches, still cares, still intervenes. I was buried by men who thought they were serving their faith by eliminating mine. But she showed that love is stronger than hate, that life is stronger than death, that mercy triumphs over judgment. You must tell them, Father Michael, you must tell them that miracles are not just stories from long ago. They are happening now, in places like this, in moments of greatest darkness. His words struck me like a physical blow, because he had called me by name, though I had never told him who I was. I looked at him with tears streaming down my face and asked, How do you know my name, Father Samuel? I never introduced myself. He smiled then, the first true smile since we had found him, and it transformed his haggard face into something luminous. She told me, he said simply. She told me that Father Michael would come from the south, wearing a silver cross from his mother, and that he would dig me out with his own hands, if necessary. She told me not to be afraid, that help was coming, and she described you so perfectly that I recognized you the moment I opened my eyes. He reached out and touched the silver crucifix around my neck with fingers still caked in red sand. She sees everything, hermanos. She knows everyone. And she is calling all of us to bear witness to love in a world that has forgotten what it means. The sun rose fully then, flooding the clearing with light and warmth. And in that moment I understood why I had been sent here. It was not just to rescue one priest from a grave. It was to be reminded that we are never, ever alone, not even in our darkest hour, not even when we are buried alive by forces that seek to extinguish faith. The kingdom of heaven is not some distant future reality. It breaks through into our world every day, in ways both great and small, and all we have to do is open our eyes to see it. As we carefully helped Father Samuel into the truck for the journey back to medical care, I looked back at the clearing one last time. The mound of red sand where he had been imprisoned stood like a memorial, and for just a moment, just the briefest flicker, I thought I saw a figure standing beside it. A woman in blue, her hands folded in prayer, her face radiant with peace. Then she was gone, if she had ever truly been there in a way my eyes could perceive. But I knew, brothers and sisters. I knew she had been there all along, keeping watch, holding back death itself until help could arrive. And I knew that what we were about to witness in the hours and days to come would shake the foundations of doubt and kindle the flames of faith in ways we could never have imagined. The journey back to the nearest medical station took 6 hours, and every moment of it felt like we were suspended between earth and heaven. Father Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness, but whenever he was awake, he spoke with a clarity that seemed impossible for someone in his condition. His words were not rambling or confused, as you would expect from a man suffering severe dehydration and trauma. No, hermanos. His words were precise, prophetic, filled with a wisdom that seemed to come from beyond himself. About 2 hours into our journey, as the truck bounced over a particularly rough stretch of road, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked directly at David, one of the young medical students who had helped dig him out. David was sitting beside him, monitoring his pulse, when Father Samuel reached up and grasped his wrist with surprising strength. "You have been running from a call," Father Samuel said, his voice hoarse but firm. "You study medicine because your father wanted you to, but your heart hears different music. You hear the call to priesthood, but you are afraid of disappointing your family, afraid of poverty, afraid of sacrifice." David's face went completely white. He stammered, trying to form words, but nothing came out. The rest of us sat in stunned silence as Father Samuel continued. "She wants you to know that the call is real, that your father will understand better than you think, and that the joy you're seeking cannot be found in a hospital position or a comfortable salary. It can only be found in surrender." Tears began streaming down David's face, and he nodded, unable to speak. Sister Grace reached over and squeezed his shoulder as he wept openly, and I realized we were witnessing something profound. This was not just a rescue mission. This was a divine appointment, orchestrated from beyond our understanding. 20 minutes later, Father Samuel turned his attention to Ibrahim, our Muslim driver. He spoke in Arabic now, words I could only partially understand, but Ibrahim's reaction told me everything I needed to know. The truck swerved slightly as Ibrahim's hands shook on the wheel, and he began to respond in rapid Arabic, his voice choked with emotion. Later, Sister Grace, who spoke fluent Arabic, told me what had been said. Father Samuel had told Ibrahim about a grief he had been carrying for 17 years, the loss of a daughter in childbirth, and a guilt that had haunted him ever since because he had been away on a business trip when it happened. Father Samuel told him that his daughter was at peace, that she did not blame him, and that the merciful one had held her in paradise all these years. Ibrahim pulled the truck over to the side of the road, put his head on the steering wheel, and sobbed like a child. We sat there for 15 minutes, while this strong, weathered man released nearly 2 decades of pain into the desert air. When he finally lifted his head, his face was different, lighter somehow, as if a crushing weight had been removed from his shoulders. As we approached the medical station, word had somehow already spread. I do not know how, because we had no cell phone coverage in that region, and we had not sent any messages ahead. But as we pulled into the compound, there were already 30 or 40 people waiting. Some were Christians from the local parish, but many were Muslims, and I even saw some traditional believers who wore the ceremonial beads of the old religions. They had come because rumors were flying like birds across the desert. The buried priest was alive. The man who should have died was singing hymns. The Virgin had stood guard over him for 4 days. People were saying that anyone who touched him would be healed, that his words could see into your soul, that miracles followed in his wake. I was concerned about this, hermanos, because I did not want Father Samuel to become some kind of spectacle or false idol. But what happened next was beyond anything I could have anticipated or controlled. The medical staff rushed forward with a stretcher, but before they could reach Father Samuel, an elderly woman pushed through the crowd. She was bent nearly double with age, her back curved like a question mark, and she walked with 2 canes, each step obviously painful. She was crying out in Arabic, "Let me touch him! Please, let me touch the Holy One!" The crowd tried to hold her back, concerned she would be hurt in the commotion, but she was determined, fighting her way forward with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so frail and elderly. Father Samuel saw her and immediately raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. In a voice that somehow carried across the entire compound, though it was barely more than a whisper, he said, "Let her come. Let the mother come to me." The crowd parted, and this ancient woman hobbled forward, tears streaming down her weathered face. When she reached the truck, Father Samuel extended his hand to her, and the very moment their fingers touched, something happened that I saw with my own eyes and still struggle to comprehend. The old woman's body jerked as if electricity had passed through her, and she gasped, her eyes going wide. Then, brothers and sisters, then she straightened. Not gradually, not over time, but in that instant. Her bent spine uncurled like a flower opening to the sun, her twisted shoulders squared, and she stood upright for the first time in what must have been decades. The 2 canes fell from her hands and clattered on the ground, forgotten. She stood there, perfectly straight, her mouth open in shock, and then she began to scream. Not screams of pain, but screams of joy, of disbelief, of overwhelming gratitude. She touched her back, her shoulders, her neck, bending forward and back with ease, and the screaming turned to laughter mixed with sobbing. The crowd erupted. Some people fell to their knees right where they stood. Others began to shout praises to God in multiple languages, creating a cacophony of worship that echoed off the buildings. Several women began to ululate, that high-pitched celebratory cry you hear at African weddings and celebrations, and the sound sent chills down my spine. But Father Samuel, even in his weakened state, raised his hand again for silence, and miraculously the crowd quieted. "Do not thank me," he said, his voice carrying with an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his ravaged body. "Thank her. Thank the Mother of God who stood beside me in that grave and is standing here now among us. I am nothing but an instrument. She is the one who loves you, who sees your pain, who intercedes for you before the throne of the Almighty. Give her the glory. Give God the glory." The medical staff finally managed to get Father Samuel onto the stretcher and into the clinic, and Sister Grace and I followed while the crowd remained outside, now praying, singing, and sharing what they had just witnessed. Inside the examination room, the doctor, a Sudanese Christian named Dr. Khalil, began his assessment. I watched his face as he worked, saw his expression change from professional concern to confusion to outright bewilderment. He checked Father Samuel's blood pressure, his heart rate, his oxygen levels. He drew blood for testing. He examined his skin for the severe sunburn and tissue damage that should have been present after 4 days of exposure. After 20 minutes of thorough examination, Dr. Khalil stepped back and just stared at his patient. Finally he spoke, and his voice was shaking. "This is not possible," he said quietly. "I have treated dozens of exposure cases. I served in refugee camps during the worst of the conflicts. I know what the human body looks like after 4 days in the desert without water. This man should have acute kidney failure. His skin should be destroyed. He should have neurological damage from severe dehydration and heat stroke. But his vitals are stable. His kidneys are functioning. His skin, aside from some dryness and minor cracking around the lips, is intact. The only thing wrong with him is muscle weakness from being immobilized, and even that is less severe than it should be." Dr. Khalil turned to me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes, the trained scientist wrestling with the evidence of something beyond science. "Father Michael," he said slowly, "I am a Christian, but I am also a doctor. I believe in miracles, but I also believe in medical reality. What I am seeing here violates every principle of physiology I was taught. This man should be fighting for his life right now, possibly on dialysis, certainly unconscious or delirious. Instead, he is weak, yes, but stable, coherent, and his body is showing signs of recovery that should take weeks, not hours. I have no medical explanation for this. None." He paused, then added quietly, "I have no explanation except the one I do not want to say out loud because it sounds impossible. But I think you know what I'm thinking." I nodded. "A miracle," I said simply. "Yes," Dr. Khalil whispered. "A miracle." As the afternoon wore on, something began to happen outside the clinic that I can only describe as a holy contagion. People who had witnessed the old woman's healing began to testify to others who arrived. Those people went and brought more people. Within hours, there were over 200 people gathered in and around the compound, and they came from everywhere. They came from nearby villages and from towns 20 kilometers away. They came on foot, on donkeys, and trucks and cars. Muslims came, Christians came, and people who had no particular faith came because they had heard that something impossible was happening, and they needed to see it for themselves. The atmosphere was electric, charged with an expectancy that made the air itself feel thick and alive. People were not loud or chaotic. Instead, there was a reverent hush, punctuated by spontaneous prayers and quiet weeping. It felt like the whole compound had become a cathedral, a thin place where heaven and earth overlapped. Inside the clinic, Father Samuel had been given IV fluids and was resting, but he refused to sleep for long. Every hour or so, he would wake and ask to speak with people. Dr. Khalil was hesitant at first, wanting to preserve his patient's strength, but Father Samuel was insistent. "Doctor," he said with gentle firmness, "I did not survive 4 days in a grave just to rest comfortably in a bed. Bring them to me. Bring whoever needs to come." And so they came, one by one, 2 by 2, sometimes whole families. I sat in the corner of that room for the next 6 hours, and I witnessed things, hermanos, things that I recorded in my journal that very night, because I knew if I did not write them down, I would later doubt my own memory. A young man named Hassan came in, a Muslim who worked as a mechanic in the nearby town. He had not spoken to his father in 8 years because of a bitter argument over an inheritance. Hassan knelt beside Father Samuel's bed and poured out his story, the anger and hurt spilling out like poison from a wound. Father Samuel listened in silence, then spoke words of reconciliation so beautiful and true that Hassan began to weep. "Your father is dying," Father Samuel said gently. "He has 6 months, perhaps less. The cancer is in his liver, though he has told no one yet. He is waiting for you to come home, but his pride will not let him call you. Go to him today, Hassan. Go today and do not waste another hour in this separation. Tell him you love him. He needs to hear it from your lips before he goes to meet his maker." Hassan left that room like a man on fire, and later we learned that he drove straight to his father's house, and they reconciled that very afternoon, weeping in each other's arms. And yes, 3 weeks later, his father was diagnosed with liver cancer, exactly as Father Samuel had said. A teenage girl named Tabitha came next, brought by her worried mother. Tabitha had not spoken a word in 6 months, not since witnessing a violent attack on her village. The doctor said it was psychological trauma, and no treatment had worked. She sat on the edge of Father Samuel's bed, and he took her small hand in his. He did not speak to her at first. Instead, he began to sing, very softly, the same Salve Regina he had sung in his grave. His voice was still rough, still damaged, but the melody was clear and pure. As he sang, Tabitha's eyes filled with tears, and her mouth began to move, forming words without sound at first. Then gradually, like a stream breaking through ice, sound came. She joined him in the song, her young voice thin and wavering but real, so beautifully real. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae. Her mother collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, and Sister Grace had to help her to a chair. Tabitha spoke for the first time in half a year, and her first words were a prayer to the Mother of God. These stories multiplied throughout that long afternoon, and into the evening. A man came who had been planning to take his own life that very night, his rope already prepared, his note already written. He left that room with hope rekindled, his suicide note torn into pieces, committing himself to seek help and to live. A couple came who had been married for 12 years without children, a source of deep shame in their community. Father Samuel prayed over them, and 9 months later I received a letter from them announcing the birth of healthy twins. A young woman came who had been trapped in addiction to pain medications after a car accident 3 years prior. She had tried to quit dozens of times and failed every time. Father Samuel looked at her and said, "Today the chains break. Today you are free. The craving will leave you, and it will not return. Go in peace and sin no more." She left that room and never took another pill, not because of willpower, but because, as she later testified, the desire itself had been miraculously removed, lifted away like a fog disappearing in sunlight. As night fell, Dr. Khalil came to me and said quietly, "Father Michael, I have been keeping track. Today, in this clinic, I have witnessed one confirmed physical healing that defies medical explanation. One case of traumatic mutism resolved instantly, and at least a dozen profound psychological and spiritual transformations. I have practiced medicine for 19 years, and I have never seen anything like this concentration of he struggled for words, of divine intervention," I finished for him. He nodded slowly. "Yes, that is the only term that fits. This is not psychology or placebo effect or mass hysteria. This is something else entirely. This is God moving among us, and I am terrified and exhilarated in equal measure." Around 9 o'clock that evening, Father Samuel finally agreed to rest, and we insisted that no more visitors come until morning. But the people did not leave. They stayed throughout the night, keeping vigil outside the clinic. Some slept on mats they had brought, others sat in prayer circles, and still others simply stood and watched the building where the miracle priest rested, as if guarding something precious. I walked among them in the darkness, and I heard their conversations. A Muslim imam was discussing theology with a Catholic catechist, both of them animated but respectful, finding common ground in their shared awe at what they had witnessed. A group of women, both Christian and Muslim, were singing hymns and nasheeds together, their voices blending beautifully in the cool night air. Young people were sharing their testimonies of what they had seen and how it had changed them. An old man told me, tears in his eyes, "Father, I came here today as a skeptic. I have seen too much suffering, too much war, too much evil in this land. I thought God had abandoned us, but today I saw that I was wrong. He has not abandoned us. He is here, and he is still in the business of miracles." As I stood there under the vast canopy of stars, listening to the sounds of spontaneous worship, and witnessing the impossible unity of people who were often divided by religion and tribe, I felt something break open in my own heart. I had been a priest for 23 years, hermanos, and I had grown tired, if I am honest with you. Tired of the struggles, tired of the politics within the church, tired of preaching to people who seemed unchanged week after week. But in that moment, standing in that compound in Sudan, surrounded by people whose lives had been transformed in a single day, I felt my own calling renewed like a baptism. This was why I had said yes to God all those years ago. Not for the comfortable parishes or the respectful titles or the security of institutional religion, but for moments like this, when heaven crashes through the ordinary and reminds us that we serve a God who is still alive, still active, still reaching down to touch his children with love that transforms everything it encounters. Sister Grace came and stood beside me, and we watched the vigil together in silence for a long time. Finally, she said, "Father, this is only the beginning, isn't it? This is going to spread far beyond this place." I knew she was right. Word of what had happened here would travel throughout Sudan, throughout East Africa, throughout the world. Lives would be changed, faith would be strengthened, hope would be rekindled in places where it had died. And it all started with one priest who refused to deny his Lord, even when faced with being buried alive, and one mother who loved her children enough to stand guard over a grave for 4 days, keeping death at bay until help could arrive. The night deepened around us, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter as if heaven itself was celebrating what had transpired in this forgotten corner of the world, this place that God had not forgotten at all. The next morning brought something none of us anticipated, and it would test everything we had witnessed the day before. I woke just before dawn, having slept only a few hours on a mat in the corner of the clinic's waiting room, and immediately I sensed something was different. The air felt heavier somehow, charged with a tension that had not been there the night before. When I stepped outside, I saw that the crowd had grown even larger overnight. There must have been 400 people now, maybe more, spreading out from the clinic compound into the surrounding fields. But that was not what caught my attention. What stopped me in my tracks was the military truck parked at the entrance to the compound, and the 6 armed soldiers standing beside it, their faces hard and suspicious. My stomach dropped. In this region, soldiers often meant trouble, especially for Christians who were seen as too public about their faith. I approached cautiously, and one of the soldiers, an officer with 3 stripes on his shoulder, turned to face me. "Are you the priest?" he demanded in Arabic. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "I am Father Michael. How can I help you?" The officer studied me for a long moment, his hand resting on his weapon, and I silently prayed for wisdom and protection. Then he said something I did not expect at all. "I am here to investigate reports of illegal religious activity and possible fraud. We have received complaints that you are exploiting vulnerable people with false claims of miracles and using a sick man to manipulate crowds for money or political purposes." His words hit me like physical blows. Of course there would be opposition to what God was doing here. Light always attracts darkness, and miracles always provoke skepticism from those who cannot bear to believe. Before I could respond, Dr. Khalil emerged from the clinic, still wearing his white coat from the night shift. He walked straight up to the officer without any visible fear and said firmly, "Major, I'm Dr. Khalil Ibrahim, the chief physician at this facility. I'm also a citizen of Sudan and a registered medical professional. There is no fraud happening here, no exploitation, and no illegal activity. What is happening here is beyond my medical understanding, but it is not a crime to witness something extraordinary." The major turned his cold gaze to the doctor. "You are claiming this man survived 4 days buried in the desert? That is impossible. Someone is lying." Dr. Khalil did not flinch. "Major, I have examined the patient extensively. I have documentation of his condition, photographs of the excavation site, and blood work that shows clear markers of severe dehydration and exposure consistent with exactly what he claims to have endured. I have also witnessed, with my own medical training and eyes, healings that I cannot explain through natural means. I am happy to show you all my documentation." The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The crowd had grown silent, watching, waiting to see if the soldiers would arrest us, shut down the clinic, or worse. I saw fear on many faces, but I also saw determination. These people had witnessed something real, and they were not going to be easily intimidated. Finally, the major made a decision. "I want to see this miracle priest myself. I want to question him personally. If he is a fraud, I will expose him. If he is truly what people claim, then—" He paused, and for just a moment I saw something flicker across his hard features. Not quite hope, but perhaps a desperate wish that the impossible might actually be true. "Then I need to know," he finished quietly. We led the major and 2 of his soldiers into the clinic, leaving the others outside to maintain order. Father Samuel was awake, sitting up in bed, looking remarkably stronger than he had the previous day. When he saw the soldiers enter, he showed no fear, only a calm peace that seemed to radiate from him like warmth from a flame. The major approached the bed and stared down at Father Samuel with barely concealed hostility. "They say you were buried for 4 days and survived by a miracle. I say you are either lying about how long you were buried, or you were never actually buried at all, and this is an elaborate deception." His voice was harsh, accusatory, designed to intimidate. But Father Samuel simply smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that somehow made him look years older and infinitely wiser. "Major," he said softly, "what is your name?" The soldier hesitated, clearly not expecting this response. "Major Rashid," he said finally. What is your first name, Major Rashid? Father Samuel pressed gently. The major's jaw tightened. My first name is Ahmed. Father Samuel nodded slowly, and then he said something that made everyone in the room catch their breath. Ahmed Rashid, son of Rashid Mohammed, who died when you were 16, leaving you as the man of your family with 3 younger sisters to protect. You joined the military because it was the only way to earn enough money to feed them and send them to school. You have served with honor for 19 years, but you carry a burden that grows heavier every day. 3 years ago, you were ordered to do something that violated your conscience, something involving civilians in a village whose name you cannot forget even though you try every night. You followed orders because you are a soldier, but your soul has not known peace since that day. You wonder if God can ever forgive you for what you did, or if you're condemned to carry this guilt until your death. The color drained from Major Ahmed's face. His hand dropped from his weapon, and he took a stumbling step backward. One of the soldiers behind him moved forward, concerned, but the major held up his hand to stop him. How? He whispered hoarsely. How do you know these things? I have told no one. No one knows about that village. Father Samuel's eyes filled with tears, and he reached out his hand toward the major. She knows, Ahmed. The mother knows everything, and she wants you to understand that you are not beyond forgiveness. What you did under orders, under threat, in a moment of impossible pressure, does not define you. What defines you is what you do now. She wants you to know that the children from that village, the innocent ones who died, they are with her now, and they hold no anger toward you. They want you to be free. She wants you to be free. Major Ahmed Rashid, this hardened military officer who had probably seen more death and violence than most people could imagine, collapsed to his knees beside Father Samuel's bed and began to weep. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound anguish that had been locked away for years. His soldiers stood frozen, not knowing what to do, having never seen their commanding officer break down like this. Father Samuel laid his hand on the major's head and began to pray over him, speaking in Arabic now, words of forgiveness and release and healing. The prayer lasted for perhaps 10 minutes, and by the end of it, Major Ahmed was no longer sobbing, but breathing deeply, like a man who had been drowning and finally reached the surface. When he finally looked up, his face was transformed. The hardness was gone, replaced by something softer, more human, more alive. I came here to expose a fraud, he said, his voice breaking. I came here ready to arrest you all, but instead, he shook his head in wonder. Instead, I have found something I thought was lost to me forever. I have found hope that redemption is possible, even for someone like me. He stood slowly, straightened his uniform, and turned to his soldiers. We are leaving, he said firmly. There is no fraud here. There is only the work of the Almighty, and we will not interfere with it. Then he did something extraordinary. He turned back to Father Samuel and saluted him, a crisp military salute, a gesture of profound respect from a Muslim soldier to a Catholic priest. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for giving me back my soul. And then he and his soldiers left, and we heard him outside dispersing the crowd slightly, telling them that the investigation was complete and everyone was free to remain peacefully. The news of what had happened with Major Ahmed spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass, and it ignited something powerful. If even a hardened military officer could be moved to tears and transformation, then truly God was moving in this place with unstoppable force. Throughout that day, the testimonies multiplied. People began spontaneously confessing sins to each other, seeking reconciliation with old enemies, forgiving debts, making restitution for wrongs committed years before. It was like a revival had broken out, but not the orchestrated kind with loud music and emotional manipulation. This was organic, spirit-driven, impossible to control or contain. Sister Grace and I found ourselves simply moving through the crowds, praying with people, witnessing reconciliations, watching as the kingdom of God manifested in real time among Muslims and Christians and traditional believers who were all experiencing the same outpouring of grace. By late afternoon, Father Samuel insisted on being helped outside to address the crowd. Dr. Khalil protested, saying he still needed rest, but Father Samuel was adamant. Doctor, I did not survive for this message to stay hidden in a hospital room. I must speak while I have strength. So we helped him outside, supporting him on each side, and when the crowd saw him emerge, a sound rose up like thunder, a roar of joy and acclamation that probably carried for kilometers across the desert. Father Samuel raised his hand for silence, and gradually the crowd quieted, 400 people or more now, straining to hear his words. His voice was still weak, but in the hush, every word carried clearly. Brothers and sisters, he began. And I love that he did not say Christians or Muslims, but used a term that included everyone. I was buried in the sand by men who believed that erasing my body would erase the message I carry. But they did not understand that the message is not mine. It belongs to the one who created us all, who loves us all, who desires that none of us should perish, but that all should come to know his love. For 4 days and 4 nights, I was in that grave, and I should have died. By every natural law, I should have died. But I did not die because I was not alone. The Mother of God, whom we honor and revere, stood guard over me. She gave me water that was not water. She gave me strength that was not mine. She sang with me when I had no voice left. And she did not do this because I am special or holy or more deserving than any other person. She did this to send a message to all of you, to all of us, to this wounded and broken world. He paused, gathering strength, and the crowd waited in absolute silence. The message is this: Heaven has not abandoned earth. God has not forgotten his children. In your darkest hour, in your deepest grave, you are not alone. The love of God, expressed through his mother's intercession, through his son's sacrifice, through the power of his spirit, that love is more real than the sand that tried to bury me. It is more powerful than hatred, stronger than death, more enduring than suffering. And that love is available to everyone, not just to those who have the right religion or the correct theology or the perfect life. It is available to the broken, the guilty, the desperate, the hopeless. It is available to you, whoever you are, whatever you have done, wherever you have been. Tears were streaming down faces throughout the crowd now, and I felt my own tears flowing freely. Father Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger with each word as if he was drawing power from something beyond himself. Some of you came here skeptical, wanting proof. Others came desperate, needing a miracle. Still others came curious, just wanting to see what was happening. But I tell you now, you did not come here by accident. You were called here, drawn here by a love that knew exactly what you needed to encounter in this moment. And now that you have seen, now that you have witnessed, you have a choice. You can go back to your old life and try to forget what happened here. Or you can let this moment transform you. You can let the love that kept me alive in that grave be the love that resurrects the dead places in your own heart. He paused again, and then he said something that I will never forget as long as I live. In 3 days, I will return to that place where I was buried. I will return not as a victim, but as a witness, and I invite all of you to come with me. We will build a simple marker there, a place of prayer, a reminder that God still performs miracles in the deserts of our world and the deserts of our souls. But more than that, we will pray together, all of us. Regardless of our different names for the divine, we will pray for peace, for healing, for an end to the violence that has plagued this land for too long. Will you come with me? The crowd erupted in affirmation, voices shouting yes in multiple languages, hands raised to heaven, and I knew that something significant was about to happen, something that would extend far beyond this moment. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation and continued testimony. News outlets got wind of the story, and journalists began arriving, cameras and notebooks in hand, skepticism and curiosity mixing in their questions. But even the most hardened reporters seemed affected by what they witnessed. I watched a French journalist who arrived cynical and left in tears after interviewing the old woman who had been healed. I saw a Sudanese television crew that came to expose a hoax end up filming hours of testimonies from credible witnesses, including Dr. Khalil's medical documentation. The story was spreading, and people were traveling from hundreds of kilometers away to be part of what would happen when we returned to the burial site. On the morning of the 3rd day, we set out in a convoy of vehicles, Father Samuel riding in the lead truck with Sister Grace, Dr. Khalil, Ibrahim, our driver, and myself. Behind us came dozens of other vehicles, and walking alongside and behind them came hundreds of people on foot, creating a procession that stretched back as far as I could see. It took us most of the day to reach the site, and as we approached that grove of thorn trees where Father Samuel had been imprisoned in the earth, I felt a sense of awe wash over me. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in colors so vivid they seemed supernatural, and the red sand of the burial mound glowed like it was lit from within. We gathered in a large circle around the mound, over 1,000 people now, and Father Samuel, still weak but determined, stood at the center. He asked for silence, and then he began to pray, not in one language, but in many, switching between Arabic, English, and local dialects, so that everyone could understand portions of the prayer. He thanked God for his deliverance. He thanked the Blessed Mother for her intercession. He asked for healing for Sudan and for all lands torn by conflict. He prayed for reconciliation between enemies and peace between religions. And as he prayed, the most extraordinary thing happened. The wind, which had been still all day, suddenly began to blow, gently at first and then stronger, carrying with it that same scent of roses I had smelled before, impossible in this arid place but unmistakable. People began to gasp and point, and I looked up to see the sky had filled with birds, thousands of them circling overhead in perfect formation, completely silent, just as they had been the night we first arrived. Then, and I swear to you, hermanos, I swear on everything I hold sacred that what I tell you now is true, the air itself seemed to shimmer above the burial mound, like heat waves, but more structured, more purposeful. And in that shimmer, for just a moment, just the briefest instant, I saw her. We all saw her. A figure in blue, her face radiant with a peace and love that transcended anything earthly, her hands extended in blessing over all of us. She was there, and then she was not there, visible and invisible simultaneously. And I could not tell you if I saw her with my physical eyes or my spiritual eyes, because in that moment they seemed to be the same. But I know what I experienced, and I know that over 1,000 people experienced it with me, because the sound that rose from that crowd was unlike anything I had ever heard, a collective gasp of wonder and awe and recognition that we had been given a gift, a glimpse of the reality that exists beyond the veil of our ordinary perception. The vision lasted perhaps 3 seconds, perhaps 30. I honestly cannot tell you because time seemed to stop or expand or disappear entirely. But when it faded, we were all changed. I saw Major Ahmed there in the crowd, in civilian clothes now, and his face was shining with joy. I saw Ibrahim, our Muslim driver, prostrated in prayer with tears streaming into the sand. I saw young David, the medical student who had been called to priesthood, and he was kneeling with his hands raised, already looking like the priest he would become. I saw the old woman who had been healed standing straight and tall, her hands clasped in prayer, her weathered face transformed by gratitude. And I saw hundreds of others, each one touched, each one changed, each one now carrying within them the testimony of what God had done in this place. As the sun finally set and darkness fell, people began to sing spontaneously without direction. Christians sang hymns, Muslims sang nasheeds, and somehow the melodies wove together into something beautiful and unified. We stayed there through most of the night, singing and praying and sharing testimonies, and by the time dawn broke over the desert, a simple cross had been erected at the site, and beside it, a marker stone that read in Arabic and English, "Here, love conquered death. Here, heaven touched earth. Here, God reminded us that we are never alone. Remember this place, and remember the one who makes all things new." Now, Hermana, I ask you, what does this mean for your life? You who are listening to these words, perhaps in comfort, perhaps in your own desert, perhaps in your own kind of grave where circumstances have buried you and hope seems impossible. I want you to understand something crucial. This testimony is not just about one priest in Sudan. It is about the persistent, relentless, unstoppable love of God that pursues us even into our darkest places. Father Samuel was buried by hatred, but love dug him out. He was left to die by those who despised his faith, but faith kept him alive. He should have been forgotten in that remote corner of the world, but instead, his story has traveled to wherever you are right now, reading or hearing these words. What grave are you in today? What has buried you? Is it addiction, depression, shame, guilt, grief, or despair? Is it the weight of past mistakes or the fear of an uncertain future? Is it a relationship that has died or a dream that has been crushed? Listen to me carefully. The same God who kept Father Samuel alive for 4 days in the sand can resurrect the dead places in your life. The same mother who stood guard over that grave can intercede for you in your moment of greatest need. The same spirit that brought transformation to over 1,000 people in the Sudanese desert can transform your heart right now, wherever you are. But you must make a choice. You must decide whether you will remain buried in your circumstances, or whether you will allow love to excavate you, to pull you out into the light, to give you new life. I returned to Kenya 3 weeks after that gathering in the desert, but I have never been the same. I carry within me now an unshakable certainty that miracles are not relics of the biblical past, but present realities for those who have eyes to see and hearts to believe. I've stayed in contact with Father Samuel, who has recovered fully and continues his ministry, now traveling throughout Sudan and beyond, carrying the testimony of what God did for him. I receive letters and messages constantly from people who were there that day, telling me how their lives have changed, how marriages have been restored, how addictions have been broken, how faith has been rekindled, how hope has returned to places where it had long been absent. The ripples from those 4 days in a desert grave continue to spread outward, touching lives in ways we cannot fully measure or understand.